Renton Reporter Sound Publishing, and the Renton Technical College for their collaboration and support in our candidate forums. And on behalf of the Renton Chamber of Commerce, I thank the Boeing Company and Puget Sound Energy for their ongoing support of our legislative approach and efforts. Questions have been submitted from throughout King County, but largely from the greater Renton community. The speaking order of the candidates was determined by a flip of the coin that occurred at the beginning of the event. With the time that we have, the candidates will each have 2 minutes for opening and closing statements. We'll have 90 seconds to respond to the questions that are asked, unless it is a follow-up or rebuttal, in which case it will be a 60-second response time. Follow-up questions and rebuttal questions will be at moderator's discretion. I thank you to the candidates for taking your time, talents, and energy to participate in this process, and we truly appreciate your service. Thank you to the audience for your attendance and in advance for your courtesy to the candidates. Candidates, once the question is read, your clock begins. You will see a yellow card at 30 seconds and a red card as your time has expired. And I'll draw your attention to the top of the room where we have the cards. If at any point it becomes a challenge in seeing those cards, please let us know and we can make adjustments accordingly. And we will begin with an introduction, and as indicated, each candidate will have 2 minutes for an introduction, and flip of the coin is for Jim. So Jim, in 2 minutes, please tell us what we should know about you, who you are, and why you're running for office.
All right, well, thank you. And thank you for being here this evening. Thank you to Sound Publishing and everybody. You know, it's great to be back in Renton. I started my legal career just a few blocks from here as the city prosecutor of Renton, and really learned how to be a prosecutor at that time. Spent 3 years, from 1995 to 1998, and it was a tremendous experience, so it's great to be back. I'm also honored to be endorsed by the former longtime three-time mayor of Renton, Dennis Law, my good friend, as well as the current mayor, Armando Pavoni, and I appreciate his support. Currently, I'm the mayor of Federal Way, a city of over 100,000 people now, a $100 million yearly budget, 600 employees, and it's something that I really love that job. It's a very important job, and we've been really prioritizing how to address public safety, leading an organization of that magnitude. And I can tell you probably the #1 issue that I deal with every day is the safety of our community. I work with regional partners, the mayors of Auburn, Kent, Renton, every mayor in the region. And I'm really, truly proud of the over 15 mayors that have endorsed my candidacy, as well as other law enforcement agencies. I can tell you that I think I'm uniquely qualified to hold this position. Not only do I have the experience as a mayor and now leading a police force of over 150 officers, but also because of my experience in the office. I spent, after 3 years here, I was a King County prosecutor for 16 years, where I tried hundreds of cases. I was a senior deputy prosecutor and was really a leader in that office. And so I've got a tremendous amount of background and I think a real perspective on how to approach the issues. I think a unique perspective. Ultimately, I think the communities of South King County really want and deserve and need a safer community. And I think there's serious concerns about our 5,000 case backlog and the manner in which cases are being handled in this office, and I think I'm uniquely qualified to be able to do that. So thank you again for being here, and I look forward to a good discussion tonight.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Carco, we've got some feedback issues, at least down here on our end.
Test.
We're still hearing some feedback down here. Okay. So Lisa, we're going to get going with you, and then if we start to experience some feedback, we can certainly pause in the process and have them adjust. Okay. But again, the question is to you. In 2 minutes, please tell us what we should know about you, who you are, and why you're running for office.
Sure. Our communities face serious public safety challenges as a result of the pandemic, police vacancies, and our crises revolving homelessness and opioids. Finger pointing and blame will not make our community safer. reduce property crime, or protect victims. Instead, that takes proven experience, collaboration, and a focus on outcomes. Our public safety issues are my #1 priority, and I have the experience it takes to make sure that our communities are safe and vibrant again. I am a career prosecutor with 27 years of experience. I lead an organization that serves 2.3 million residents in King County. I have a workforce of 600 employees and an annual budget of $80 million. I'm the only candidate that has built and implemented effective crime prevention strategies and have delivered results on important public safety issues. Here are some recent examples. I have partnered with business leaders and city attorneys to reduce organized retail theft and property crime. I have increased accountability for sexually violent predators by finding $2.3 million in state funding. I have reduced juvenile crime to all-time lows with proven and effective diversion programs. I've increased police accountability by forming a public integrity unit dedicated to reviewing officer-involved shooting and police use of force cases after I-940, and I still have important work to do. And as your next prosecuting attorney, I will bring 27 years of proven leadership, and I will act with a sense of urgency that has been missing. I will bring accountability. I will prosecute and seek appropriate sentences for property crime, violent crime, gun crime, and sexual assaults. I will be smart on crime and tackle tough issues and root causes such as drug addiction and mental health disorders. I will reduce crime and recidivism with proven and effective diversion programs, and I will openly share our outcomes. I will build a fair and transparent justice system that protects public safety and promotes racial equity.
Thank you very much to both of the candidates. And I let everybody know that we have forms that are for candidates' questions from the audience. If at any point you come up with a question that you would like asked, we will have an opportunity for audience comments or questions at the end. So please, I believe the Renton Reporter representatives down here have the forms, and there are forms in the lobby as well. So please feel free to scribe your questions and submit those for the same for consideration. All right, next question, and this will go to Lisa first. Lisa, if elected prosecutor, what is the first thing the public will notice from your leadership? How will you be different from the current King County prosecutor?
The first thing people will notice is that I will use the megaphone that is attached to my voice as an elected official to take a strong stance on important issues. Drug dealing, repeat property offenses, organized retail theft. That behavior is illegal, and those individuals will be held accountable. I will also convene a public safety summit. We know that we don't have enough police resources in our community, and I will ensure and invite the partnership of all law enforcement partners, local officials, so that we are focusing our scarce resources on the same priorities to have a collective and cumulative impact. I will also work with the 28 state lawmakers who have endorsed me and reimagine our mental health system and build our involuntary treatment at court that intervenes before people decompensate and commit crimes. Right now it's an adversarial system. If we change state law, it can be a collaborative system where we have police, prosecutors, judges, and public defenders working together to get people the help they need. And the benefit of doing that is that we can also use our mental illness drug dependency tax to pay for it, because we know we don't get enough state resources. Those are 3 things I would do right away.
Thank you. And House, we've got some feedback again. And we will go to Jim, again, 90 seconds. If elected prosecutor, what is the first thing the public will notice from your leadership? How will you be different from the current King County prosecutor?
Well, the execution of a real plan to address the 5,000 case backlog, that's truly a failure of justice and failure of leadership. There are over 500 sexual assaults, 180 murders. That needs to be approached with just a sense of urgency and a clearly delineated plan that has not been done. And so I think it's instructive that was not in that answer, which is really a crisis in the justice system. Fixing the filing and disposition standards in regard to how the office is filing cases and how they're approaching them in the community. There is a complete schism and a break between the communities of King County and the King County Prosecutor's Office about these issues that we've been in dialogue for years with the Prosecutor's Office to meaningfully address. Also, with regard to bringing people together, I've already done that. I've been endorsed by thousands of law enforcement officers with the endorsement of the King County Police, Seattle Police, Bellevue, Kent, Federal Way, Des Moines, and over a dozen or 15 mayors. So I think actually, as my opponent keeps talking about bringing people together and what they're going to do, but yet she talks about essentially running the office for the past 15 years. If these are such priorities, why haven't they been done in the past 15 years while she's been leading this office? I think that's a real question. I think actually if you want more of the same, the status quo and things to continue the way they are, my opponent is your candidate. If you'd like a change and a fresh approach and hit the restart button, I'm your candidate. Thank you.
Excuse me. May I address the backlog concern, or will there be a question on the
We
backlog?
will actually have a question on
Great,
the backlog.
that's
Yeah,
fantastic.
thank you very
Thank you.
much. Yeah. And now this is going to be for your top 3 priorities, just 3. We're going to start with Jim on this. If elected, what are your top 3 priorities?
Well, it has to be the backlog, a real sense of urgency. It's a bandwidth issue with regard to speedy trial. We can't just blame this on COVID and allow this backlog of these very serious cases to just languish. There has been no discernible plan that has been put out. Difficult decisions are going to be made. You're going to need to triage those cases, and a specialized unit's going to need to set up to really address those head on. Number 2, we need to set up a true conviction integrity unit at the King County Prosecutor's Office, and really make sure that we're working to do that, to make sure that we've got those systems in place. Number 3, once again, I think filing a disposition standards and making sure that the charging decisions and the way the office is run is consistent with community expectations and desires. People deserve to be safe and to feel safe, and right now they do not.
Thank you very much. Lisa, what are your top 3 priorities if elected?
My top 3 priorities are addressing the backlog, prioritizing the prosecution of sexual assault cases, and ensuring that we have public safety in all of our communities. I have already been hard at work addressing the court backlog. We have had our prosecutors in the courthouse every day of the pandemic filing violent crimes, sexual assault, repeat property crimes. During the same time, the Washington State Supreme Court closed courts, effectively halting our ability to resolve cases. I secured funding. We already have prosecutors who are specialized that are triaging that unit and those cases and prioritizing them. We don't need a special commission to do the work that we're already doing. I will prioritize sexual assault cases. As a woman and as the mother of a young teenage girl, this issue is important to me and it's personal to me. And I will also work with all of our local officials and law enforcement to ensure that not only do we have safety, but people feel safe. The things that I've been doing, partnering with the Seattle City Attorney's Office to reduce organized retail theft and property crime in the downtown core, has had an impact. The Downtown Seattle Association reports that property crime is down by 20% since January, and that violent crime is down by 30%. Now, whether or not you believe in their data that they have reported to their paid members, it's an indication not to give up, but that we are on the right track, and that type of collaboration and impact can happen in all parts of King County.
Thank you very much. Lisa, and this is a 90-second question. What does it mean for a prosecutor candidate to be pro-police?
Well, for me, policing is a common ground issue. I 100% support our police. When we are afraid and call 911, we want a response. We also want police who know how to de-escalate volatile situations, and we want police who abuse their authority or who engage in biased policing. We want them off the force. We all want that. I also supported the initiative of I-940 and the reforms. I formed a public integrity unit that is dedicated to reviewing officer-involved shooting and police use of force cases, and it's because of this work that I intentionally declined to seek the endorsement of any police guilds, because that review would not appear or feel fair and unbiased if I'm endorsed by police unions. I know how hard the police work is. My significant other is a retired assistant police chief who had a 35-year career in law enforcement. He is also someone who has been shot, who's been stabbed. I know how dangerous this work is. Not only do I support good policing, I've been endorsed by well-regarded police leaders like Sue Rohr, Jim Pugel, retired Sheriff's Major Jim Gradden, Faye Brooks, Ted Gleason, Les Liggins, police officers who believe in public safety and also believe in reform, just like me.
Thank you. Jim, what does it mean for a prosecutor candidate to be pro-police?
Well, I think most importantly, a prosecutor needs to be pro-truth. That is and pro-accountability, and really follow that whatever it is. But I'm truly proud of the endorsements I've received from thousands of law enforcement officers from the King County Sheriff's Guild, Seattle, Bellevue, Federal Way, Des Moines, Kent, King County Corrections. I think each and one of those agencies and their statewide, some of the statewide organizations are very concerned about the state of public safety in our community, and they're looking for a prosecutor that will truly uphold the law and be a presence in Olympia. To say that crime is down when just in the past year, car theft in this state has gone up 88% in 1 year, and that's statewide. And that's because of the policies that were done in Olympia by those legislators that have endorsed her that prohibit police pursuits. So I think that we need a prosecutor that's going to be a presence in Olympia and a voice in Olympia for that. But also, we cannot tolerate any kind of misconduct, and that is why we made sure in the city of Federal Way that we implemented body-worn cameras. And I have a policy at the city of Federal Way that if any officer ends up on the Brady list, proven misconduct and dishonesty, that they will be terminated at the city of Federal Way. And I think that you've got to make sure that you've got internal systems, that we don't tolerate any kind of misconduct, and that we have officers on our force that we can be proud of. But we need to hold, no one is above the law, and anybody who violates it needs to be held accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. As a 60-second question, as a follow-up to the previous question, and I'm going to go to Lisa first on this. What are your thoughts when hearing defund the police?
You know, I don't believe in defund the police, but I also know that that message comes from years of hurt in our communities of color and our Black communities where people have felt that policing has been uneven. You know, for me, it's important that we acknowledge that there are racial disparities in our criminal justice system and that we intentionally work to dismantle them. We also know that we need police resources. We need police to investigate crime. We need police who refer crimes to the prosecuting attorney's office so that we can prosecute them. To me, again, policing is a common ground issue. It is an area where we definitely want police who are well-trained, well-regarded, but also acknowledge the history of policing and the racial disparities, and also who know how to de-escalate volatile situations.
Thank you.
Yes.
And again, 60 seconds to Jim. What are your thoughts when hearing defund the police?
I think it's rooted in historical pain and really grievance in regard to it. You're really feeling certain populations feeling like, and certain people in our community not feeling like they were being listened to and not treated well. But clearly, the people in our community expect police to be fully staffed, and they deserve to have a police force. They believe they deserve to have a police force that when you pick up 911 and call, that an officer is there to respond. In the city of Federal Way, we added quite a number of officers. We're at a historic all-time high. We just added 13 new officers, and we've been seeking opportunities to gain more. The crisis in Seattle is that there are at least 400 officers down. They actually, in Seattle, are not able, where there was a front page Seattle Times article, they were not actually able to investigate new sexual assault cases, which is, that's just an outrageous failure of the system. And we need to make sure that we encourage officers and that we make sure that we have the resources and the will to employ them. The corrections officers are 100 officers down. It's just unsustainable.
Thank you very much. Back to a 90-second question. Jim, in what ways can the prosecutor's office work better with cities and law enforcement agencies to reduce property crime and increase perceptions of public safety?
It's a great question. You know, I've been leading a coalition. I'm very proud of the endorsements of the mayors of Auburn, Kent, Renton, almost every county in South King County and East King County, if you take a look at my website. You know, we actually approach, we meaning all the cities that represent well over 1 million people, approach the King County Prosecutor's Office and repeatedly asked for assistance on these very issues. That's why I'm running now, because what we heard back was pushback and statistics and really no meaningful change. Remember the filing and disposition standards that I was talking about? That's what we're talking about. When we're talking about building coalitions, I've already done it. I've already brought all the people with all the communities together and law enforcement agencies because there's significant confusion in the law right now regarding pursuits, the ability to detain. Officers are truly confused on occasion about where their authority lies because of the reforms that went too far in Olympia. We need a prosecutor to go down to Olympia, get these laws fixed, and work with our law enforcement agencies and the community to set reasonable expectations. There's also this cycle in which retailers are truly, there's this really downward cycle in which retailers aren't calling, police aren't arresting, and you really do need to get them all on the same page. That's why in the city of Federal Way, we had a retail safety summit to address these issues. We'll do that countywide. That work is actually ongoing. But we really need to hit the restart button on these issues because it does affect people. And when they see people walking out of stores with grocery carts full of goods and nobody stopping them, that's got to end.
Thank you. Lisa, in what ways can the prosecutor's office work better with cities and law enforcement agencies to reduce property crime and increase perceptions of public safety?
Long ago in 2017, I combined the car theft initiative, the repeat burglar initiative, and I put it under the high priority offenders unit. And we are trading information actively with law enforcement because we know the individuals who are having the most impacts on our communities. That work has been ongoing. Most recently, we've been sharing those notes with the Seattle City Attorney's Office and the Seattle Police Department, and we are having an impact because crime is down. That's not a sign to give up. It's a sign that that type of collaboration can happen in all parts of King County. Under my leadership, I will have my prosecutors at roll calls, training police officers, and I will be there alongside of them. Unlike Dan Satterberg, I will attend our monthly police chiefs and sheriffs meeting. As the elected, you have to be in the room to build relationships, to build partnerships, and to also be held accountable. I have convened law enforcement, and I have invited them to come to the table when they have concerns. I most recently reached out to both Kent, Des Moines, Federal Way, because they mentioned that there were challenges. Every police department met with me except for the city of Federal Way. I got a phone call from the chief that said, I don't have a problem with your office, Lisa. We know that you're working really hard. There's absolutely no reason to meet. I have that voicemail. I'm happy to share it. Policing and partnership is important. In order to make our community safe and supported, we have to work together. We have to stop bickering.
Thank you. Lisa, 90 seconds. What are some of the current policies or conditions that have contributed to the massive backlog of cases in King County courts, and what are your proposed solutions to mitigate that backlog?
Sure. Currently, we do have a court backlog of charged felony cases. That number is about 4,500, and the reason that number is high is because every day of the pandemic, our prosecutors were in the office filing between 20 and 30 felony cases. Property crimes, sexual assault, violent crimes, and gun crimes. During the same time, the Washington State Supreme Court issued an emergency order that closed our courts, thereby halting our system's ability to resolve cases. This happened in every jurisdiction in the country, not just King County. I successfully secured $14 million in COVID relief funding. I've used some of that money to hire 120 new employees, including 10 new victim advocates, to ensure that more victims are getting services while cases are being resolved. Because of the resumption of jury trials, because of this increase in funding and staffing, and because of the hard work of my prosecutors and legal professionals, we are steadily decreasing that backlog and are absolutely on target to eliminate it. I have also been working with the courts to bring innovation like dedicated plea courts so that we can resolve more cases in a timely fashion. I'm also working with the public defenders who have had a hard time getting to see their clients because of jail staffing shortages. We've worked those out. We now know that we are going to reduce this backlog in probably just under 2 years and get back to pre-pandemic levels.
Thank you. Jim, what are some of 90 seconds to you. What do you believe some of the current policies or conditions that have contributed to the massive backlog of cases in King County courts, and what are your proposed solutions to mitigate that backlog?
Well, I've been talking about this issue for 8 months, and I can tell you that only when I started really hammering on this issue did I start hearing the semblance of a plan or the semblance of ideas on how to address this. I can tell you that you really do, you need to conduct a triage of these cases, and you really need to figure out at this stage right now, really from seriousness on the homicides and the sexual assaults, those need to get filed. But additionally, you're just going to need to run a triage of these cases and make sure it's a bandwidth issue at this page. As soon as you file a case, and these cases have been filed but they're stalled, there were only a certain number of judges and a certain number of, you've got to expand that bandwidth and get those cases through. You also need to probably run a cost-benefit analysis on some of these cases, and which cases at this point are even viable because of these pretrial delays. And so that needs to occur. So you need to bring in either pro tem judges, retired judges, and really expand courtroom space, expand opportunities to be able to get those through. But you've got to have a discernible plan. The city of Seattle, on their pre-filing plan, had a very discernible and public plan. And that just has not been done, and it's really, it needs to be addressed, and expeditiously and with a sense of urgency. These cases don't get better with time. In fact, the King County Prosecutor's Office just got reversed last week with the Court of Appeals on a permanent dismissal on a homicide case because of a homicide that sat in a drawer for 12 years. So, that's just absolute mismanagement. And so I really think that these cases have, especially the homicides and the sexual assaults, they need to get to trial. They don't get better with age, and there has to be a sense of urgency. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Errors that my opponent is suggesting.
Actually, we have a follow-up question on
Okay.
that. And the question is on the math on the backlog is questions if it adds up to COVID or if there was a backlog that existed before COVID. And if that backlog existed, what is the perceived contributors to that backlog that was in existence prior to COVID?
Sure. The 4,500 backlog is charged cases because of the pandemic, because our attorneys were in the office filing charges every single day. There was some a delay. I don't want to say a delay. There was a difficulty in getting sexual assault cases tried in a timely fashion because judges were issuing continuance after continuance in cases. We met with the judges. We met with CaseArc. We met with other advocates. And those issues have been resolved. With regard to the backlog, the city attorney had a very different type of situation than the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. The city attorney inherited unfiled cases that were not addressed, and she had to dismiss them because of statute of limitation matters. In our office, we have a backlog because our prosecutors have been hard at work filing cases every single day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And again, that's a rebuttal for 60 seconds. The question is the math on the backlog, if the backlog is existence because of COVID, or if there was a backlog in existence prior to COVID, and what the perceived contributors were to that backlog.
Well, there's been no sense of urgency, no outward and public discussions about how they're going to address it until just very, very recently. And I'm really the one that's been shining a light on this. And, and I actually said in my response that the city of Seattle was different than this because it was pre-filing versus a post-filing. But the triage will need to occur nevertheless. These cases are getting old, and cases. I'm the only prosecutor. I'm the only candidate on this dais that's ever tried a criminal case. I've tried hundreds of them and handled thousands of cases. And cases don't get better with age, and injustices occur when that occurs.
Thank you. I would ask both of the candidates if you feel that you have answered or addressed any kind of questionable facts or stats in that.
Well, I take great exception with the chief of police being quoted in a telephone message that I talked to him about that I think does a great disservice to the chief of police of this community, of the city of Federal Way, with some sort of vague, you're doing okay, where you had left a message with him. And I think spreading that out there that somehow or another the chief of police either doesn't support my candidacy or supports yours is really beyond the pale. And I think really, I think you should probably talk to the chief of police of the city of Federal Way before you just so casually throw his name out in front of thousands of people.
I reached out to the chief of police because he said that he had concerns. I reached out in a sincere effort to address his concerns, and he told me he had no concerns. I feel that I can take him at face value. I do want to address that murder charge that my opponent mentioned. So this was a case that was charged. We received a conviction, and the conviction was overturned by the Court of Appeals, which we don't control. That case remained unsolved for many years. When we finally had the evidence to file the case, we were working on very serious pending cases, and the defendant in this 12-year-old murder case was already in prison on a life without possibility of release sentence. So we worked on the pending cases that were current in that moment. The lead prosecutor, who is well-regarded.
I'll let you finish.
Stop.
Yeah, I'll let you finish
The lead
that.
prosecutor, who was extremely well-regarded, did file that case. We did obtain a conviction, and the Court of Appeals overturned it, and we are appealing that decision to the Washington State Supreme Court, and that defendant remains in prison because he has a life sentence without possibility of release.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your courtesy to the signage. I appreciate
Sure.
that. And both of you are doing really well with your timing and stopping. Thank you. Back to a 90-second question, and this goes to Jim first. Jim, name one program or policy implemented by the outgoing King County Prosecutor Dan Satterberg that you support and would like to even enhance.
You know, I've heard great things about the community court. I think making sure that people get an opportunity to course correct and meaningfully course correct. I also think that RCP is a good program once it's fixed, and I can explain that later. But I think that their diversion programs are very important to be able to help people course correct. And I can talk more about RCP down the road. But I think anytime that you give individuals an opportunity to get themselves back on track, where there's transparency, accountability, and where they have been held accountable, I think those are good things. We don't want people to come back to court. We don't necessarily, it's not about jailing people. It's ultimately about helping people finding justice, and justice takes the form of accountability and also punishment accountability, but also that the victim feels that there's justice as well. So I think those type of programs are very much rooted in getting people back on track.
Thank you. And Lisa?
Well, actually, Community Court is a City of Seattle program. It's not a King County program, but we do have mental health court, drug court, and veterans court. I support the work of restorative community pathways. In Washington State, we have mandatory diversion for all juvenile misdemeanors. It's been in our state law since 1978. We've had juvenile diversion for that long. Restorative community pathways is the most effective, most modern, and most holistic diversion program that we've had to date. Early results show that it has a recidivism rate of 8% compared to 22% for juveniles who are prosecuted and sent to 12th and older as detention. Restorative community pathways meets our legal obligation under state law, and it also addresses some first-time, nonviolent felony matters. Of the 391 cases that have been referred to RCP, 302 of them are misdemeanors, and the other cases have some scary names like robbery in the second degree or assault in the second degree. In juvenile realm, robbery in the second degree is one young person pushing down another person and stealing property. It might be a phone, it might be a backpack, it might be cash. Assault 2, and we keep statistics on this, and we also keep a case summary on every single case. They are playground or schoolyard fights. Restorative community pathways is not a free pass. Right away, young people are referred to 9 nonprofits that serve youth directly in their homes, in their communities, nights and on weekends.
We can do a rebuttal on this, and we'll go 60 seconds for each candidate.
Okay, now the downside to RCP was launched with zero notice to the cities, absolutely no input from us, and no changes after. And really, my issue and the issue of many of the mayors that have endorsed me are no case numbers, no check back, no discernible plan, no final report that includes serious. I don't think robbery is not a serious offense, and to minimize that is concerning. It's felony assault, robbery second degree, bringing a gun to school, unlawful possession of a weapon, residential burglary. All of those cases right now under this plan are eligible for never appearing before a judge, never getting a case number, and never finding out whether they were showed back in no final report or no treatment program. That's not a diversion program, that's a look in the other way program. And that is a failure. And that, when we addressed that repeatedly with the King County Prosecutor's Office, of which they didn't tell any city in King County until it had been in place for 6 weeks. That is an abject failure and a really breach of trust. Thank you.
Lisa, I'll give you 60 seconds on that rebuttal.
Thank you. So Restorative Community Pathways was approved and voted on by all 9 of our King County Council members. There was an RFP that was widely advertised to get those 9 nonprofits, and there were community meetings that talked about the RFP and talked about RCP. There are dozens of mayors that are not claiming ignorance about restorative community pathways. And with regard to the cases that were referred, there was one unlawful possession of a firearm case that was referred to restorative community pathways. There was a young person who had a gun in his backpack at school. The school officials wanted that case referred to diversion because there was no indicator that he had threatened anyone with it or pointed it at anyone, because that is assault. There was also one kid who took a BB gun to school, and that is mandatory diversion under our state law. It's disingenuous to state that this was somehow implemented under the cover of darkness. And when requested, we not only met with our local officials and police chiefs, we also appeared before the Federal Way City Council to address RCP.
Thank you. We will go back to a 90-second question, starting with Jim. Jim, what are your feelings of the LEAD program, which is the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program? And is this an effective alternative to the various approaches the state made during the legislation over the past 2 years?
Well, I was never supportive of LEAD. I really, ultimately, I don't think you're doing any favors with people by enabling them. I think people in the throes of addiction, they need the whole part about addiction, and it's horrible. We've all known people that have struggled with this issue. We want people to get help. We want them to be able to recover from their addictions, whether it be drugs. There were people, at least in regard to the experience that I had with LEAD, and my understanding of it was just this far too optional. And really, we've got a situation right now in which there's a de facto legalization of all drugs in this state because of the actions that the legislature took in regard to the 2 prior warnings. And so we've got a real problem in our community in regard to drugs, drug usage in broad daylight. I think, Mike, I'd have to take a real hard look at exactly how LEAD is being implemented, what factors it is, but ultimately I just think that the permissive uses here and the manner in which it's been approached is not conducive to helping people ultimately, and that's what it's about. And once again, I'll have to take a look at exactly how that is being rolled out. But I think actually, when you look the other way, when you're too permissive in some of these programs, by enabling people that are committing offenses, whether it's juveniles or adults or whatever the circumstances is, you're really exacerbating the problem and allowing it to get much more serious down the road. And I think people encounter the criminal justice system because they're in crisis, and we need to help them out of that crisis.
Thank you. Lisa, what are your feelings of the LEAD program, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program, and is this an effective alternative to the various approaches the state made during the legislation over the past 2 years?
Sure. Public safety is my #1 priority, so we have to address drugs. Individuals who are dealing fentanyl and other dangerous drugs will be prosecuted. Drug dealing is illegal, and that behavior will not be condoned. It's not welcome in our communities, our streets, or our communities. With regard to people who are suffering from drug addiction, substance use disorder, I support LEAD as one tool in the toolkit. It's supported by law enforcement. We also have to ensure that we have adequate access and capacity in our drug court, mental health court, and veterans court. We also have to offer community-based treatment, and we have to be honest about the size of the need in our community. Not everyone should have to encounter our criminal legal system just to get help. We also know that people who are struggling with addiction, just like others who are facing really serious medical issues, may suffer relapse. We can work with the experts who understand addiction science, and we can plan for relapse in a way that is safe for our community and also safe for the individual who's experiencing that. I support LEAD because law enforcement supports LEAD. It has been studied, and they do continue to report on outcomes. I think that type of transparency is really important to our community.
Thank you. Lisa, 90 seconds. Cities and police departments around our region cite Senate Bill 5476 regarding the Blake decision as a large contributing factor to the increase of crime and visible drug use. What are your thoughts on this legislation, and would you uphold or modify the same?
The challenge around the Blake decision is our Washington State Supreme Court ruled that the possession of small amounts of drugs is unconstitutional, de facto kind of decriminalizing drugs. Our state legislature recriminalized drugs for the period of 1 year, but first you have to offer 2 bites at diversion. The challenge is we do not have the infrastructure to keep track of what is happening to individuals, what services they're being offered, and when. What I support is a well-organized and well-funded system that both addresses incidents of crime. So let's hold accountable those individuals who are dealing drugs to young people and vulnerable people. And for people who are struggling with addiction, let's make sure that they have access to drug court, veterans court, mental health court, because we know that it's proven and effective and they have dedicated resources. And for community-based treatment, we have to have the database that shows where people have been referred, when they received services, and what the outcomes are. And I would wholeheartedly go to Olympia to advocate for that type of well-funded, coordinated system, because that is what it's going to take to help clean up our streets and to address this in a holistic, coordinated fashion.
Thank you. Jim, to you, 90 seconds. Cities and police departments around our region cite Senate Bill 5476 regarding the Blake decision as a large contributing factor to the increase of crime and visible drug use. What are your thoughts on this legislation, and why would you uphold or modify the same?
You know, there's been so much significant misinformation, and you just heard some of it right now. The state Supreme Court did not rule that possession of drugs was unconstitutional or the enforcement of it. They ruled that one word was missing from the statute. One word. It could have taken 15 minutes by the legislature to add the word knowingly. What the state Supreme Court said is, with the consequences that naturally flow from a felony conviction, a defendant should only be held accountable for conduct that they intended to do. That's rooted in fairness and common sense, and actually the Blake decision was rightly decided. What is absolutely astounding is that it gets lost in this morass. You would never be able to tell from that answer that all the legislature had to do was add one word to the statute, which was knowingly. They refused to do that and instead implemented this, which has made street-level enforcement of narcotics impossible. Take it from somebody who leads a law enforcement agency of 150 officers. So you have this system now in which you have to have two prior warnings before anybody can be held accountable for possession of methamphetamine, fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, whatever it is. But there is no database. So you know what happens? It's unenforceable. There is a state of de facto legalization of hard drugs in our community. And somebody, the King County prosecutor, needed to go down there and lead, and they didn't. And at the same time, they instituted policies in regard to pursuits. It's really outrageous.
Thank you. Jim, we'll start with you on this one. This is 90 seconds. Felony filing criteria in the state of Washington identifies $750 as a felony offense, yet King County has changed the filing standards to offensive over $2,500. What are your thoughts on this change, and do you think this filing standard should be modified in any fashion? If so, how?
Well, for the two candidates up here, I'm the only one that's ever filed a felony case. I filed hundreds of them. It was my job every day for years, either mainstream felony domestic violence, felony special assault. I filed these cases. I tried these cases. I know these cases. Now I handled thousands of them myself. I can tell you that right now, we being the mayors of King County and South King County have approached the King County Prosecutor's Office about what we refer to as filing and disposition standard inflation. And it is inappropriate for the shifting of the burden to be from King County Prosecutor's Office, who should be filing felonies, to be shifting down to the cities. And so we've addressed this over and over and over. I was one of the mayors that was actually trying to outreach and serve as a facilitator with the King County Prosecutor's Office. And that's why we all met with the front office, with Lisa and her companions and the current prosecutor at the Tukwila Community Center to try to find some common ground. But the mayors, your mayors in South King County and your police chiefs met repeatedly to discuss this issue, met repeatedly with the King County Prosecutor's Office, and we got pushback, we got statistics, and frankly, that's why I'm sitting here right now. I think actually what we have seen is really a failure to listen to the communities that they serve, launching programs with no notice. Do you know how the cities in King County found out that RCP was operational? We found out on a Zoom. 6 weeks after it had been launched. And it's just really just an inappropriate and a real failure to communicate with the cities.
Thank you. Lisa? Felony filing criteria in the state of Washington identifies $750 as a felony offense, yet King County changed the filing standards to offensive over $2,500. What are your thoughts on this change, and do you think this filing standard should be modified in any fashion? If so, how?
It is actually state law, not filing standards, that sets the amount. But we in the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office did, back in 2008, amend our filing standards and move the dial from $750, which was listed in statute, to $2,500. We did that because we were facing very serious budget cuts, and also because that number, $750, hadn't been updated since adoption, and it was listed in statute at a time when homes in Seattle were under $300,000, and that was way back in 2008. At that time, we met with all of our local officials, we met with all of our police chiefs, and that has been our standard since 2008. It is not the reason that people are not being prosecuted for crime. Those cases are being handled by our city attorney's office. And in the Seattle City Attorney's Office, I struck up a partnership. We trade notes every day, especially on cases where individuals are systematically preying upon businesses and communities, and we aggregate the value of those losses, and we combine them, and we can take those to felony, and we've offered to do that with every city attorney in King County.
Thank you. Lisa, we'll start with you on this one. This is a 90-second question. In the wake of the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, King County Prosecuting Attorney Dan Satterberg joined 83 elected prosecutors from around the nation in refusing to prosecute those who seek or assist in providing abortions. Would you have done the same if you were the prosecutor? Why or why not?
You know, as a woman and as the mother of a young daughter, this issue is extremely personal to me. I've been very clear that I will not use my prosecutorial discretion to prosecute anyone seeking an abortion, nor will I collaborate with anyone seeking to prosecute someone traveling to Washington for safe care. Currently, there are no statutes or laws that prohibit someone from getting an abortion in Washington state, but I believe in the safe access to reproductive care, to abortion, and to choice. I will stand with officials that always seek to protect abortion and reproductive care. After I made my stance clear, I did hear from 2 male donors who told me that they had concerns and that they were pulling support. When I agreed to run for office, I made a promise to myself that I would not abandon my values, that I would not say or do anything just to win a vote. So I am in strong support of access to reproductive care.
Thank you. Jim, 90 seconds. In the wake of the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, King County Prosecuting Attorney Dan Satterberg joined 83 elected prosecutors from around the nation in refusing to prosecute those who seek or assist in providing abortions. Would you have done the same if you were the prosecutor? Why or why not?
I would, and I will. I made it clear after that decision that I will always stand up for a woman's right to choose. I felt so strongly, it ended up on my materials, on my literature, on my website. I really, these are anguishing decisions for me. They're the very core of an individual's personal rights. I think it's really concerning for the first time in American history that we have seen an erosion of personal liberty, something that has been understood to be an individual's personal right for the past 50 years, and I think it's very concerning. So I agreed with that decision, and I would follow that as well. So I steadfastly support a woman's right to choose and would never engage in prosecution related to that.
Thank you. We have now an opportunity, and we'll give you 30 seconds to think about this, and then we will start out with a question from Lisa and then a question from Jim. So what we are going to do is give you 30 seconds to come up with a question that you would like your opponent to answer. So we'll start with your 30-second countdown on generating your question. And while they are coming up with those questions, we'll ask the audience if you have any questions. Make sure you get those to our Rent Reporter representatives so we can field the audience questions. And since you're both still ready, I'll give you a full minute, and you're at 15 seconds left. All right. Lisa, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Sure.
The question that you would like to pose to your opponent. And just for announce, you'll have 2 minutes to answer this question, so a full 2 minutes
Okay.
to answer the question.
I would like my opponent to explain why he felt that he could stand with Mike Solon, who is the president of the Seattle Police Officers Guild, who is actively fighting against transparency and democracy by protecting the SPD officers who participated in the insurrection on January the 6th.
You know, that is just such a deeply troubling question for for somebody who wants to be a prosecutor for all the people of this community. Number one, Mike Solon represents over 1,000 Seattle police officers. He is their elected leader of the police officers in Seattle. But yet what I find really unfortunate is that you want to draw a direct line between that and January 6th to try to sort of muddy the waters, and really, really unfortunate. You know who else was there? There were representatives of thousands of officers. The King County Police Officers Guild was there. The King County Corrections Guild was there. Mike Solon, who represents, he was not there in his personal capacity. He was there in his professional capacity. And if you really took a moment to listen, that whole issue with January 6th that at least that I'm aware of is because the officers that were there, and this is what, according to him, I don't have any involvement in this, but the officers that were there, not at the Capitol, but at that demonstration, were found by the Seattle Police Department not to be in violation of their bylaws, or not found to be in any violation. And according to the guild agreement that they have with the city, if an unfound allegation is made and it's not sustained, their names are not subject to disclosure. They were simply following the terms of an agreement. But for some reason, because it has to do with that, you want to bring that in. And that's the kind of just nefarious sort of finger pointing. I am running to be the prosecutor of all the people in this community. And I'm not going to be backed down from being supported by the Seattle Police Department because it happens to have a conservative leader that is doing his job as the leader of the Seattle Police Guild. This is about law enforcement. And she's talking about making sure that you're building bridges with law enforcement, but she's personally attacking the integrity of all of the Seattle Police Department with this. And so this is the kind of thing that has actually been raised recently that is very disconcerting to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa, do you want 60 seconds to respond to that?
No, I think it was his answer.
Okay. And so we will go for a 2-minute answer. And Jim, if you would like to pose your question.
So it was well documented that there were literally hundreds of cases that were referred to the King County Prosecutor's Office for well-documented looting and stealing that occurred in Bellevue, at the Bellevue Mall, at the Bravern, that there was video evidence, there were police reports, there were identifications, a tremendous amount of work was done to walk those cases into the King County Prosecutor's Office. Why were none of those filed?
Microphone's off. We did file those cases, and we shared that information not only with reporters but also with leaders in Bellevue and the Bellevue City Council members. The thing that I felt was unfortunate about those Bellevue cases is that there was a request of Dan Satterberg that he stand up and he stand with Bellevue leaders and say that looting was wrong, and he did not do that. I'm a different leader than Dan. I'm not afraid to use the megaphone that is attached to my voice. I will speak out on important issues. I will stand with police. I will stand with local officials. I will stand before city councils and ask for police resources. And I will also stand up and say that we have racial disparities in our criminal legal system and that they need to be dismantled. We absolutely prosecuted those cases, and we shared that information.
Jim, would you like a 60-second rebuttal?
No,
or
it's fine.
questions? Okay, thank you very much. Now I will look to our representatives from the Renton Reporter. was doing the math in my head. So I'm going to go with a 90-second response on these. And these questions are for everyone. And please bear with me. You guys did a great job at legibly writing. I appreciate that. And I'm going to start with Lisa on this one. Lisa, assuming the pursuit law does not change, how will you deal with cases that are brought to your office that challenge or help define the implementation of the law?
Well, the Washington State Legislature was elected by people to reflect the values of the community that they serve. And they passed a law that said you cannot use high pursuit except in very certain circumstances. And, you know, no one would call Sheriff John Urquhart soft on crime, and he supported those reforms. So if we have cases that where someone engages in an illegal police action, that will be challenged by defense. But we know, and I believe in our police, and we know that they have exceptional tools and that they will be able to solve crimes, and they will refer those cases to us, and we will give them the individual attention and review, and we will file them when we have the evidence to go forward. Absolutely.
Thank you. Jim, assuming the pursuit law does not change, how will you deal with cases that are brought to your office that challenge or help define the implementation of the law?
That challenge?
That challenge or help define the implementation of the law?
Well, let me just say, it's got to get changed. We were one vote away in the Senate. The House passed the amendment. We were one vote away in the Senate. Sure would have been nice to have some help down there, to have the King County Prosecutor go down there to stand and basically say that this is an absurd and ridiculous situation in which officers are watching stolen cars drive away and they can't do anything about it. This is really one of the rarest we're an outlier in regard to states. To answer the question, though, you need to get it fixed. That's number one. Number two, you just need to go with the best evidence that you can go with and do what you can to be able to prosecute cases. I saw the, I talked to a lot of individuals, a lot of legislators, and a lot of community leaders. We need to find a way to make sure that we can bring forth our best evidence, prosecute the cases with the best evidence. But we really need to make sure is that these laws get passed in a vacuum of people that haven't practiced these cases, don't have this experience. I sat with a room full of legislators that had never been involved in a criminal case, had not been involved in any kind of criminal investigation. And that's why I think my experience as a litigator for 19 years, 3 here at the city of Renton and 16 in King County, will really provide a backdrop to make sure that we have legislators that are making good decisions based on the kinds of common sense things. 88% increase in the past year in car theft as a result.
Thank you very much. The next question will be posed to Jim first, but for both candidates. Are there laws passed by the legislature that you believe should be repealed or revised?
Well, we just discussed one. I really think ultimately what needs to happen with the drug laws, the King County prosecutor, the prior prosecutor, the legendary Norm Mailing, he went down and, when there was when the cocaine epidemic and the crack epidemic in the 80s, adjusted delivery of cocaine and level 2 narcotics, Schedule 2 narcotics, to a level 8 offense that addressed that for a while, got it under control. Years later, he went back down there and made sure that it got readjusted and really made sure that it met community expectations and tamped that down. We need the prosecutor to go down there and make sure that we've got common sense laws. I think we need to hit the reset button. These 2 prior warnings, we need to have systems that make sense. We need to make sure that we've got a paradigm, a law that is easily executable and understandable by the officers, and that we don't have people literally sitting in public streets shooting up without the ability of law enforcement to do something about it. That's just a complete failure of the system and common sense. So we don't need necessarily to jail a bunch of people for their addiction issues. They need help, and the only way they're going to get help is if they're held accountable. And they're not going to get off this if we're just looking the other way as a society. And we can't have these complicated sentencing or these paradigms in which the officers have no idea they're handcuffed on the street. So I think I've got some ideas on how we can actually do this, and I'll share those with the legislators.
Thank you. Lisa, Are there laws passed by the legislature that you believe should be repealed or revised?
I absolutely believe that our Involuntary Treatment Act laws need to be revised. They haven't been revised in more than 2 decades. When I was a brand new prosecutor and I worked in Involuntary Treatment Act court, chances are if you were walking around in downtown Seattle with a machete or a hatchet, you were going to get services for at least 72 hours and then maybe get moved to a less restrictive alternative that was community-based. I don't believe that's the case now because I have prosecutors who are fighting for treatment against someone's wishes. I take that very seriously. But on the other side of the table, I have public defenders who are fighting for someone's release, often to nothing, into the streets. If we amend our laws, we can make that a collaborative court where I have police, designated crisis responders, judges, prosecutors, and defense working together to get people care in the least restrictive means possible before they decompensate, before they commit crimes, before they scare people that are on the street. And the benefit of amending those laws and making it a therapeutic court is we can also use our King County mental illness, drug dependency tax dollars to help pay for treatment and services because it's an allowed use and we know that we don't get enough state funding to meet the need in our community. That's one of the root causes that I would address is the type of behavior we're seeing in all parts of King County, and there is a fix to it.
Thank you. Next question, beginning with Lisa. How will you work with South King County leaders to address crime? How will you show those leaders that you are listening to them?
You know, we have met with South County leaders every time they have reached out to us and asked us to meet. We do show up with data and statistics because it matters. We are data-driven, and we also want to show the results. When we met with our South County leaders, we shared with them that police referrals for most of their jurisdictions had decreased over a 2-year period of time. In Federal Way, that decrease of law enforcement referrals was down by 29%. We offered to meet with law enforcement. We offered to do roll calls with them. We offered to train their officers on any part of our filing and disposition standards that were confusing. It's really about collaboration. It's working in partnership to get results. It is sharing the data. It's being proactive, and it's opening up and remaining open with lines of communication and tackling tough issues together.
Thank you. Jim, how will you work with South King County leaders to address crime? How will you show those leaders that you are listening to them?
Well, I think I'm sitting here as a result of the failure of the administration to do that very issue. And I can tell you that I did it actually the other way around. I actually was counseling. I don't know if people realize this. 3 years ago, your mayors in South King County, including the mayor of Renton here and in South King County and East King County, wanted to hold a press conference and talk about their concern with the direction of the King County Prosecutor's Office. Being a former senior in the office, I said, don't do that. Let's not do that. Let's invite them together. Let's sit down. We met for weeks and months individually about how we were going to approach the office, and we were very thoughtful about the issues that we did. And we met with them, and we met with them. And ultimately, we have, as you heard, about how the rollout of RCP occurred. And there's I think I would work very well with all of the mayors in King County. But ultimately, respect is indicated by honest communication, meaningful communication, and I think that work is well underway. I've got a wide coalition of individuals, and I think ultimately, when you, as a leader, and I do this at the City of Federal Way, you've got to come into meetings with an open mind about, is there something we can change? Is there something we can do? And I think that's ultimately what really shocked me. Being a former deputy in the office, being a former senior, somebody who, I have great respect for Dan Satterberg and the work that he has done. And I just was really astounded with the manner in which they responded.
Thank you. Thank you both. So I'm going to go to the individual, what are posed as individual questions right now. And what I will do is I will lead with a 90-second for the posed candidate, or the question is posed for, with an opportunity for 60 seconds rebuttal by the other candidate, and a 30-second response if warranted or requested. So the first question is for Lisa. Lisa, you have stated that there are racial disparities in policy. Is there any hard evidence that this is due to prejudice, or could it be due to disparities in the rates of commissions of crime?
You know, we know that there are racial disparities in our criminal legal system because the data shows that there is. And unless we think system actors are creating these disparities intentionally, the data alone shows that there's inherent racism or systematic racism built into our systems. In order to dismantle racial disparities, we have to be intentional. We have to share and study the data. We have to actively talk about race and understand how it intersects with our criminal legal system. There are some things that I have done to directly address the systemic racism that is in our system. I implemented our office's Equity Social Justice Committee. I also implemented mandatory implicit bias training for all employees and staff to get to the heart and to improve fair and impartial decision making. I also implemented mandatory cultural competency training to better understand race and how it intersects with our criminal legal system. And under my leadership, we were the first prosecuting attorney's office in the state to issue a public-facing data dashboard that shows the racial makeup of both referrals and filing. So we can absolutely result this, but we also need to apply a race equity work lens to our work, and we can invite the participation of our communities, because if we do it by ourselves, we won't build the trust of our BIPOC and other marginalized communities, and we absolutely need their trust.
Thank you. Jim, would you like 60 seconds to respond?
Yes, yes. Well, let me just say that, after doing a couple hundred jury trials, I can tell you that you got to listen to the answers. And, it's not the criminal legal system, which he said over and over and over. It's the criminal justice system. And there is a difference. Justice is at the root of all that we need to do. So I would say that I'm a big proponent of Innocence Project work. One of my key supporters and endorsers is Mike Heavey, who was a King County Superior Court judge after he was a state senator. And you really, I think at the core of this issue, yes, there are disparities. Yes, there are racial disparities that must be addressed. Where those occur in the process and the fulcrum point is identification procedures. We need to make sure officers are called onto the scene, and when they're called onto the scene, how the identification occurs and whether they're done in an objective manner, whether they're best practices. We need to make sure that those are done in a manner that are consistent and fair, to make sure that we don't get that tunneling in by law enforcement and prosecutors once that decision is made. And that's really an Innocence Project work where unjust convictions occur, and we need to unwind those and make sure that any type of systemic racism is stamped out, and that's implicit bias and all kinds of other issues. Trainings need to occur, but being aware of that, I think, is critical. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa, would you like another 30 seconds?
Yes, please. So the reason people say criminal legal system is because not everyone in our community feels that there is justice. If you are part of a Black or brown community that has been unfairly prosecuted, that has received unfair police attention, you're not going to feel that justice was done. And we also know that it's not just police ID where implicit bias shows up, because we see those disparities in cases that have nothing to do with police identification or police lineups. Also, earlier I heard my opponent say that he would start a public integrity unit within the office. We did that actually 5 years ago. It's called the Sentence Review Unit. We look at claims of innocence, and we also look at sentences in non-homicide cases that are exceptionally long, that no longer meet our standard values for justice.
Thank you. Lisa, this question is going to be posed to you again, and I remind you that we start with the 90-second response, 60-second opportunity, and a 30-second response. Lisa, since the state will now review all police use of force incidents, do you feel you still need to the review system you worked on setting up? And I can repeat that if you'd like.
Well, yes, we right now have an independent investigation office that looks at investigating those shooting cases, but it doesn't have the authority or the prosecutorial discretion to make filing decisions. And also we know that the independent investigation office is at the very early stages of getting set up. I think they've been authorized to hire something like 40 investigators, and to the best of my knowledge, they are fewer than a dozen. So absolutely, we need the public integrity unit to look at officer-involved shooting and police use of force cases after the passage of I-940. Absolutely.
Thank you. Jim, would you
I
like
got it.
60 seconds to
Sure.
read the question again?
Yeah, as a mayor that oversees a police force and the officers are involved in shootings, unfortunately on occasion, I actually think the provisions of 940 were well crafted and are actually working very well. Obviously, you need to have those independent investigations, and the prosecution, the power rests with the King County Prosecutor's Office and the King County Prosecutor at this time. But we do need to make sure that we've got systems in place and continue in place in which there's true objectivity, in which, if law enforcement has taken a life and been involved in a shooting, I think that levels of separation are absolutely critical. And we need to make sure when the prosecutor's office does make a decision that it's based just on the facts and nothing else. And so I think it's also critically important that, I believe, and it's something I hold very dearly, that no one is above the law, no one. And we need to address instances that occur based on the evidence and the best evidence that comes before the prosecutor's office, regardless of who the individual is.
Thank you. Would you like 30 seconds on that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Jim, this question is for you first, and it's again the 90 seconds. It's a two-part question, but there's the first part. I'm going to read the first question. I'm going to read the first question that has been crossed out, and the second portion is your question.
All right.
So the first part says, since the restorative justice program was initiated by the King County Prosecutor's Office, how many juveniles arrested for alleged felony crimes have been diverted into that program? But it's crossed out.
Okay.
The second part of that question says, what criteria are used to make the diversion decision?
Well, there are certain, we really, I have to tell you, just as a mayor, as a public official, as a resident, as the father of a 15-year-old who attends high school, I just addressed the prosecutor's office repeatedly about addressing some of the criteria, some of the crimes that are eligible. Bringing a gun to school, unlawful possession of a firearm, residential, there are about 5 or 6 felony crimes that should not be on that list, especially with no case number, no check back, no kind of idea about what the program is. I've said repeatedly, I could fix RCP in a day, and I plan to. You have to have in diversion programs the earmarks of transparency and accountability and justice, and not sort of this, we're just going to figure out what happens down the road. These are very serious cases, and I don't think you can minimize robbery second degree. I'm 56 years old, and I've never been robbed. It's a violent crime by definition. A felony assault is a violent crime. If a teenager is in somebody else's living room in a residential burglary, they probably need to see a judge, right? They've taken a wrong turn somewhere along the line. If they brought a gun to school, they probably need to see a judge, probably need to have a defense attorney. But the goal ultimately about all of this is to make sure that these young people who have made a mistake, made a wrong turn, have a meaningful opportunity to course correct, to get that case dismissed, to move forward. But they can't move forward if they don't understand and they haven't fully encountered the repercussions of their actions. But you do so in a manner in which we want to help people. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa, would you
Sure.
like me to repeat the questions?
No, I have the question. Thank you.
Thank you.
So there have been 391 young people referred to restorative community pathways. 302 of those have been misdemeanors. 89 have been first-time nonviolent felony cases. These young people, it's not a free pass. They are expected to work with the 9 nonprofits, and they are expected to redress the harm. So the nonprofits meet with young people and their families at their homes and their communities on nights and on weekends. And with all due respect to our judges, I don't know a single judge that does that. Restorative Community Pathways also provides the same services to victims, and they also pay for the harmed parties' out-of-pocket losses like an insurance deductible or the replacement of property. When you file a case, it is not diversion. That's called prosecution. And under our state law, we have mandatory diversion for all misdemeanor crime. And this RCP also handles some first-time, nonviolent felony cases where there is no injury, like robbery in the second degree. I know that sounds scary, but when you have someone pushing down another person and taking a backpack and there are no injuries, it is best resolved in restorative community pathways.
Thank you. Jim, would you like 30 seconds?
Wow, the problem is, if you don't have a case number and you don't have any idea, the mayors of King County have asked repeatedly, what is the program? We don't know. We don't know what the program is. We don't know if they show up. We never get a report back. You can do a diversion court. You can do a treatment court. If you refer these cases out, if a judge were to refer these cases out to a provider and say, come back in 60, 90, 120 days, and by the way, with the taxpayer money that you're being paid to do, you should tell us what you did they show up, how many times did they show up, what were they asked to do, and then at that time you can get the case dismissed.
Thank you. And we'll go back to a 90-second. And this is a question posed to Jim first. And again, we've got a two-part question. The first part is crossed out, so I'll read both. Jim, do you believe the high crime rate and backlog has anything to do with food insecurities, lack of housing, mental illness, etc.? What do you think is the reason? However, the question is, do you intend to imprison the poor and disadvantaged for crimes such as stealing food, or do you plan to provide resources of help?
That is a great question. I ultimately, the causes for crime are multitude, they're legion. And ultimately, in all the thousands of cases that I handled, I always told deputies that I was training, or deputies that, or cases that I handled, I always told young deputies I was training to treat the people on the other side of the table the way you would want somebody you cared about treated, a family member, a relative, somebody you loved. Treat them with respect and dignity. In every case that I ever handled, I thought about where that individual, the defendant, was on this continuum about why did this happen? Is this a one-time thing? What's occurring with this individual, and how do we get this individual to the point where they don't return? So no, we're not going to jail people for being hungry and for those circumstances. We're going to help people and find people where they are. But where individuals have pulled a trigger or they've done something that is irrevocable, then they need to be held accountable. But ultimately, that's a very small percentage of the cases. Most of the people that we encounter in the criminal justice system are in crisis. They've had something happen to them, they've been victimized, and ultimately, the reason why I'm so committed, why I love the work at the King County Prosecutor's Office and why I want to go back and lead the office, it's about helping people. And it's not just about helping the victims and their families and the community, it's about helping the offenders as well, to make sure that they get back on track and live their best life. And I've run into people that, either on buses or in stores or those kinds of things later, and I've had people, come up, shake my hand and say thank you. And thank you for the way you handled that. You're being treated with respect.
We're at time. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lisa, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I think
Okay.
I have it. We as leaders, if we work together to meet basic needs, we will have the automatic impact of improving community well-being and improving community safety. Now, I have in other forums heard my opponent say that it is not his job to solve homelessness. And of course, people who are homeless are definitely in need. That doesn't say we turn a blind eye to crime, but it does say that when we offer basic needs that allows people to recover and restore their lives, they are more amenable to treatment and mental health treatment and behavioral health treatment. And I'm also confused because I hear my opponent both say that it's a small number of individuals who are committing crimes, that most people actually are in the criminal justice system because they need help, but then he also says crime is the worst that it's ever been and that we aren't doing a good enough job prosecuting people. So I'm just confused by that.
Thank you. Jim, would you like 30 seconds to help with that?
Yeah, last month we had the record number of homicide call-outs of the homicide unit at the King County Prosecutor's Office. 28 times the homicide unit of the King County Prosecutor's Office was dispatched out to scenes. And so car theft, as I've told you, property crime is going through the roof. And then with regard to this issue regarding housing, the King County Prosecutor's job is not to get defendants housing. The King County Prosecutor's job, and I don't know what's controversial about this, the King County Prosecutor's job is to take referrals from police departments and make a decision about whether you're going to file and follow through on those cases.
We have a time. Thank you. This is a question that will begin with 90 seconds to Lisa. Lisa, since the state... Oh. Wrong question. Lisa. Why are your law enforcement endorsements from people who are no longer in the profession, and why no current law enforcement endorsements?
You know, there are no, actually I am endorsed by Ann Kirkpatrick, who is presently active law enforcement. She used to be the chief in Federal Way. You know, a lot of active police chiefs do not endorse because they work for mayors and they don't want to politicize. Being endorsed by a police guild is not the same as being endorsed by a police leader. It's being endorsed by an organization, just like being endorsed by a labor organization is not the same as being endorsed by an individual teacher or nurse who is part of that union. I'm very proud of my law enforcement endorsements, Sue Rohr, Jim Pugil, Jim Gradden, because it shows that they share my values, that they respect public safety, and they also respect reform just like me.
Thank you. Jim, would you like 60 seconds?
I'm very proud of the law enforcement endorsements, but that doesn't mean I can't be impartial and approach cases on a case-by-case basis. I've been endorsed by the Federal Way Police Guild for years, and anytime that something comes up with the city of Federal Way, we handle cases on an individual case based on the evidence and based on what's going on. But I want to go back to the salon issue, the president of the Seattle Police Officers Guild. I want you to imagine 1,000 police officers. I'm truly proud of the endorsement of the rank and file of all of the Seattle police officers, the King County police officers of Bellevue, Kent, Federal Way, Des Moines. Think about how many law enforcement officers that represents. I'm honored to have that. And they're a discerning bunch. And what they have said is they're willing to put their names and reputations behind mine to say that they are concerned about public safety, and they believe I'm going in the right direction, have the right message to create a safer, to help make sure that we've got a safer community. And everybody in this room and in this community, in this region, deserves a safe community and to feel safe.
Thank you. Lisa, would you like 30 seconds?
No, I think that's fine.
Okay, thank you. We'll start with Jim on this one with 90 seconds. It's a multiple part question again. Isn't it true a large number of officers left the force due to mask mandates and laws passed in Olympia? Isn't that the reason for the lack of resources? Do you believe these laws were passed to support disadvantaged communities?
These laws about, could you read that again?
Yep.
Just the last part.
Yeah, it says, do you believe these laws were passed to support disadvantaged communities?
Well, I'm sorry, could you read that? I want to make sure
I'm going to read the whole thing.
I want to make sure I answer the question.
Yep. Isn't it true a large number of officers left the force due to mask mandates and laws passed in Olympia? Isn't that the reason for a lack of resources? Do you believe these laws were passed to support disadvantaged communities?
Well, let me say this, that there's been a mass exodus of officers out of Seattle. They are 400 officers down. They're about, I think right now they're around that 1,000 figure, 900,000. They should at least be at 1,500. They've got a real crisis, and it's going to take years to get them back from that. I don't think it was necessary. I don't think it's the mask mandate. I think clearly law enforcement is at a crossroads and ultimately changing about community expectations and really about reforms that are needed, some long overdue, body-worn cameras and accountability. But I think that some law enforcement officers left because they just didn't feel, I think some of them maybe not feel appreciated, or that it's a difficult profession. Can you imagine how difficult that is to do? And ultimately, yes, I think some of the reforms were passed with the idea to address prior issues. But I think ultimately the communities in King County, the community at large, wants fully staffed police departments. That's where Seattle is now. Now they're in the process of incentives and hiring incentives and getting staffing back where it was. Because right now, as I said, there was a front page article in the Seattle Times that they literally could not investigate new sexual assault cases because they didn't have the personnel to do it. That's just a failure. You've got to have the right amount of law enforcement. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge to hire people up, but we've hired 13, or authorized the hiring of 13 new officers, and we'll get there in Federal Way.
Thank you. Lisa, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I think I have it. You
Okay.
know, the pandemic has impacted every single profession across all lines of business, and of course, policing did not escape that. So there were retirements. I know that there were some officers who left because of the mask mandate, because I know that that happened in the King County Sheriff's Office. I think that there were also probably some officers who maybe just were tired of the profession. I don't have any firsthand knowledge or data about that. I do agree that law enforcement is a difficult profession, but I think that the mask mandates were initiated in order to protect public safety following health guidelines during a worldwide pandemic where millions of people died. I think that the question about whether those laws benefited was it marginalized communities? Disadvantaged communities. I think what that question is drawing attention to is recognition that policing has not always been even in our Black and brown and marginalized communities.
Thank you. Jim, would you like 30 seconds?
No, I agree with that last statement. Yeah, I agree
Okay.
with much of that.
Okay, wonderful. That is the conclusion of the audience questions or comments. And I will give each candidate the opportunity for a 2-minute closing statement. And Lisa, we will begin with you.
Sure. I want to say thank you to Sound Publishing and to the Renton Chamber for hosting tonight's forum, and thank you to our audience members for attending and for tuning in. The residents of King County deserve a prosecutor who shares their values, who is 100% committed to ensuring that all of our communities are safe and supported. A prosecutor who can identify common ground, build strong coalitions, and work in collaboration to get results. A prosecutor who protects public safety by immediately addressing incidents of crime and also addressing root causes. A prosecutor who doesn't criminalize the poor and unjustly incarcerate our communities of color. A prosecutor who isn't afraid to call out the inequities of our criminal legal system, and who will also actively work to build a fair and transparent justice system that protects public safety, promotes racial equity, and provides opportunity and hope to all parts of King County. I am that prosecutor. I am proud to have the endorsements of 215 individuals and organizations who share my values, leaders like Governor Gary Locke, Mayor Bruce Harrell, Mayor Lynn Robinson, former Police Chief Jim Pugel, Sue Rohr, King County Executive Dow Constantine, 17 retired judges, 28 state lawmakers, and 11 labor organizations. I would be honored to have your vote.
Thank you very much. Jim, I'll give you 2 minutes for your closing statement.
All right, thank you. It's been great to be here. Thank you very much for everybody listening. Thank you, Sound Publishing, and to the theater. You know, I've thought a great deal about this race. I've thought a great deal about really what this election really is about. And, you know, my opponent's been Chief of Staff for 15 years. And I think you just have to ask yourself, do you feel safer in King County in the past 15 years or just in the past few years? And I'd say most people would answer that no. Is the status quo working for you? Because if the status quo is working for you and you feel like we're in the right direction in public safety, my opponent's your right choice. If you want to change, if you want a reset button in regard to how we approach public safety, how we can collaborate with our cities and our law enforcement and our business and our labor, and making sure that when people show up to work and they park their truck outside and their catalytic converter is stolen or their truck is stolen, that there's going to be a response. That if a police officer is behind them and sees them, that they can at least pursue them. That there's going to be a response in the system, the justice system, because justice matters, that the justice system will respond in a manner that the community can support. And so that's really what this election is about. Do you want more of the same? You want the status quo? Or do you want a reset? And I've got a vast repository of experience, thousands of cases that I've handled, hundreds of jury trials, hundreds of people that have donated my campaign and endorsed me. And I'm proud of the endorsement of our Congressman Adam Smith, Representative Amy Wallen, 15 current mayors, Senator Mark Mullet, former Representative Christine Reeves, a long list of mayors, a long list of labor and community leaders. But ultimately, it's not about, it's not necessarily about endorsements or any of that. It's about, do you believe that we can do better? And I do. I really, truly believe. That's why I'm running. That's why, I love my job as the mayor of Federal Way. It's been one of the greatest honors of my life. But I can tell you, I'm doing this because I feel like I have to. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to both the candidates. I want to thank the City of Renton tonight for the facility that we're in. I want to thank Carco Theater and your staff for all of the organization and efforts that you have put in. Our 100% timekeeper, I'd like to thank Danielle Smith for your efforts today. Thank you to the Renton Reporter and the Renton Technical College for their collaborative partnership. I want to thank you both of the candidates, not only for your time tonight, but for the service that you continue to provide to the communities and seeking this election. I think I'm confident in echoing the sentiments of our candidates that this is one of our most important elections yet. And so for that, I thank you, the constituents, for showing up, for asking the questions, for exercising diligence and getting to know your candidates, and for showing up for the election and voting. This concludes our 2022 Candidates Forum for the King County Prosecutor's Office.